Thank you. All right, so I figured this would be kind of a fitting in the moment thing because EMF this year is themed on space. And this is not a talk about space, but this is a talk about, in some sense, aliens. So Project CETI is the Cetacean Translation Initiative. We are a group of scientists, interdisciplinary, from all over the world, from universities, from the west coast of the US to the UK. We have folks at Berkeley, MIT, Oxford, Haifa, everywhere, all over, and all disciplines. Maybe not every single discipline, but we have folks who are roboticists. We have marine biologists, of course. We have machine learning specialists, because you have to have AI. We have ethicists and legal scholars, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that later in the talk. But it's an extremely diverse group of folks, and what we're really trying to do, and Cetacean Translation Initiative is a little bit of a backronym because we wanted to name ourselves after SETI, the extraterrestrial search for intelligent life. But what we really do is not so much translating as trying to understand what is it that whales, and specifically sperm whales, are saying to each other. And just a note about me, I am a program manager on the group, so I know a little bit about a lot of things, but I'm not going to go super in-depth on any one thing because we have in-depth researchers who tell you that. So this is going to be just an overview of what we're doing. I will show you lots of pictures and videos of sperm whales and tell you about some of the cool things that I discovered working on this project and learned about by getting to work with all of these incredible people everywhere. Right, so how did we end up with the Cetacean Translation Initiative? Where did you get a bunch of scientists to sign up to this kind of crazy, wild-sounding project? In early 2020, before the pandemic hit, there were some folks who were on a fellowship at Harvard. Unfortunately, I wasn't one of them, but my now good friends were there together, and there was a marine biologist named David Gruber, who is now leading the project, and this biologist named Shane, working out in Dominica, recording whales and doing lots of conservation work, had sent him these recordings of sperm whales. Not really knowing what to do with them, not really sort of any agenda. They were just two biologists sharing information, marine biologists working in the sea. And David was playing them in his office, and someone walks by who happens to be a cryptographer. Some of you might be familiar with zero-knowledge proofs. A woman named Shafi Goldwasser was one of the co-authors of that paper, and she was the one who happened to be walking by, and she went, "That sounds like code. That sounds like something that you could unencrypt. It sounds like Morse code." And so she popped her head in and she said, "I think we should do something with this. Hi, I'm Shafi. I think we should do something with this." And then that's how this project started. And through those connections, both David and Shafi have people that they've obviously worked with over the years. They pulled together this incredible group of people. And since then, we've done a huge amount of trying to figure out, can we actually look at what whales are doing and understand what they're saying? So, okay, why sperm whales exactly? So, sperm whales have the biggest brains of any animals on the planet. They are huge. They also communicate using sound over very, very long distances. They have these complex societies, and they, interestingly, we already knew before we started this project through Shane, the biologist that was working in Dominica, that they have really interesting cultural dialects. So we knew that there was something going on with their language before we even started looking at it in detail. Because Shane, who spent 30-odd years listening to these whales and knows every whale in Dominica by name, just by like its hump on the horizon, he's incredible. He had gone to different areas in the world, like Sri Lanka, listened to different whales and gone, oh, they are speaking differently. I can recognize the patterns of the clicks well enough to know that whales in other parts of the world versus the whales that he knew and had these relationships with in Dominica were actually using different dialects. So we had an inkling already that sperm whale language was complex and that it would really be fruitful to research how sperm whales were communicating to each other as a way of trying to understand, get a foothold into the animal communication world. Okay, how do they talk? So many of you might be familiar with this idea of whaling, going to kill sperm whales, the Moby Dicks of the world, for the spermaceti that lives inside their huge organ. That is actually what they use to talk, or part of what they use to talk. So they force air through their big nostrils, and then it actually reverberates back through the spermaceti organ, and then forces out and makes clicks that are so loud that if you were next to a sperm whale when it clicked, it would actually probably damage your hearing pretty severely. So don't do that, or try not to do that. They also have these things called codas. So these are distinct from the clicks that they put out into the water to echolocate, to try and find each other. A coda is actually like a distinct pattern of short and long clicks. So it's so that you can actually start to identify patterns, this thing that kind of sounds like Morse code. So they're making huge sounds out into the water. You can put a microphone, we call it a hydrophone, on the end of a stick off a boat and actually hear them from a very long ways away. So let's see if we can show you a little bit of sperm whale speaking. Let's run that again. Oh. Okay, you can just about hear that there. They're just like making these clicks at each other as they go through the water. Let's just play it again. Okay, so that was a little bit jumpy, but it sounds a bit like, and they're quite distinct. Let's just. Sorry, folks. All right, we'll just keep going through the slides. So the way that we work as a global institution is we are located in Dominica because sperm whales throughout the rest of the world, they are migratory. They do long migratory distances, but in Dominica, it happens to be really special. This is where a lot of sperm whales go to have babies. So they actually stay there year-round, and there's this one corridor in Dominica that you can actually find them. So we forged a pretty strong relationship with the local government in Dominica to build a research lab there. And we also built an educational program. We have fellows who are from the local community college. They don't have a university in Dominica, but they have a 2-year community institution. So we have a fellowship program for students from there to join our team and learn how to do field research. And then we have this global network of researchers that we bring in. So we have a linguistics team that's part of UC Berkeley, and I'll go through a little bit of their work later. We have a robotics team at Harvard who is figuring out the pretty difficult challenge of how do you actually record underwater a massive, massive animal that just dives really, really deep, really, really fast to go hunt, and then might hang out on the surface for a little bit and then dive and hang out on the surface. How are you going to actually get this sound? We picked the possibly hardest animal to do data collection for in this one. And then what we are really trying to do is build an interdisciplinary group. So David, who founded the project, is a marine biologist. There is a big sort of marine biology center to the thing, but we have also all of these people who are building the tags, figuring out how to deploy the tags, figuring out how to handle the data in the data pipeline. Let me tell you, it's not really obvious, but there are a bunch of logistical challenges that come up when you are doing data collection in a country that doesn't have reliable internet and also is beset by tropical storms. There is also, I mentioned Shafi earlier, she's doing a lot of theoretical work to figure out how can we actually know when we think we've made discoveries about the language, how can we validate that theoretically in the least invasive way possible? Right, so I mentioned that collecting data in a marine environment in general is pretty hard. It is especially hard when you are trying to collect data on big animals who dive as deep as they can to go search for their food source, which is squid. We had some really, really rosy ideas at the beginning of this project that we were going to stick a bunch of microphones in the water in different parts of Dominica, and they would just kind of ambiently record all of the sperm whales all of the time, and that would be great. We would have just a ton of data, the biggest collection of data ever on sperm whale vocalizations. I will tell you in a minute why we had to pivot on that a little bit. But we did end up investing quite a lot of time, and this is what the Harvard team works on, in figuring out how to attach tags to sperm whales in a way that is non-invasive. People have done sperm whale tagging before and other kinds of whales tagging, but what they tend to do is actually build a tag that hooks into the animal's skin. And we felt like we wanted to be gentler than that in our approach. So we spent a lot of time figuring out how to make tags that would stay on with suction cups. And we also, more recently, focused on how to have an automated glider that would follow these sperm whales around. The suction tags, and this is a kind of hard to see photo, but that's actually a drone dropping the tags on the whales. When we first started this project, the default way of putting a tag on a whale was to go out in a little dinghy, sit there, take a big long pole, and try and stick it on the whale's back. As you might imagine, this worked some of the time. Not very much of the time, which is why when we first started working on the data collection that already existed that was collected by people tagging in this way, it was really, really small. Small enough that people were sending it to each other via email. So we were not working with big data sets at first. So what we have done is, one, really work on the tags themselves. So one thing that's important is how can you suction effectively onto the whale long enough for it to stay on, and stay on under quite a lot of force, because these whales, they stay maybe up at the top of the water for an hour or so, chit-chatting, and particularly in Dominica, they stay up at the water more often because the babies don't actually dive. So when they've got young, there will be at least the young whale up at the top, and then the parents will dive, eat, come back up. But the other thing is we wanted quite a lot of data collection capabilities, because one of the interesting things that allows us to start picking up patterns, etc., in what the whales are doing and identifying that with what their clicks are saying, is being able to tie an accelerometer to that particular data set, for example. We had ambitions to do video, we're not quite there yet. But we've done, I think, 3-ish generations of tags to try and get the suction better, to try and get the tag to be able to have more data recording collection mechanisms on it, and also be a little bit smaller so that those suckers don't have to work as hard to stay on. And a big difference was this drone tagging. This was a bit of a game changer, because we were able to have someone, usually this was we have a lot of kind of undergrads who are really good at playing video games come and do the drone tagging for us. As also, they're trained roboticists and they are trained to be in the field, but I think their main skill above the kind of older people that work in sort of Harvard for a long time is this, hey, I know how to work a controller really well. And they basically go out and they get this little drone and they get it above the whale and then they drop it and it suctions onto the back of the whale and stays there for roughly 24 hours and then we are able to retrieve it when it kind of falls off and bobs up out of the water and get the data off of it. So this was probably our biggest data collection challenge. I said that we were maybe a little bit rosy-eyed about this idea of we can just put hydrophones everywhere in the water on buoys and we're going to listen to everything that's happening. Turns out that when you try to attach something to the seafloor in a country that has a lot of tropical storms, there is a lot of force on the cable that is attaching the buoy to the seabed floor. And if you have a buoy that has a lot of tech on it, that's going to be an interesting problem. So we got this amazing buoy together. You can see it in this photo. We put it out into the sea. Everybody was so excited. And I think about 5 days after we got it in, the first tropical storm of the season came, twisted the thing until the cable broke loose, and it went floating off away and was found by some fishermen who told us where it was. So we did actually get it back out of the water. And I think we tried 2 or 3 more times with different types of cables and doing things like different types of attachments to the seafloor. We haven't quite got a buoy to stay in place yet. But that's okay, because we have this cool thing with a autonomous glider that actually follows the whales around. So we partnered with a French company that does marine sensor technology. And this glider is an autonomous underwater drone, basically. And it can follow the whales, record everything that they're saying, and it has the nice property of not needing to be attached to a seafloor and responding to storms. Cool. So now that you know all about our fun problems trying to get data, which I will say that this is actually the hardest part of the project. Anybody that's worked on a machine learning or AI project probably knows that it is the data that is key. So the data collection of this project is, in my opinion, the really interesting part. But we have also managed to collect enough data, throw enough models at it to learn some interesting things. So I mentioned we have a team of linguists out in Berkeley. They have been starting to identify parts of whale speech. And I think they have a reasonable claim to saying that they have identified an analogous part of speech to vowels and diphthongs in whale codas. So for those of you who are unfamiliar, diphthong is like when you kind of have 2 vowels in one. When you're saying a word like out in English has a, u. So whales also do this thing where they kind of stretch out a coda in a form that's analogous to diphthong. So I'll play this. It sounds, I'm sorry, a little bit like a fart. It's not a fart. It's a whale making a little, very quick series of clicks. So let's just play it. Can you hear that? Okay, yeah, do you hear that? Very quick. And from that, they built on this idea of being able to identify the phonology of sperm whale. So really building on that, okay, we have vowels and diphthongs, but what is the grammar of sperm whale speech? And for those of you who are interested, I will be around for questions. I believe there is a question tent somewhere that Harold can direct us to, and I can share with you all of the papers links for all of this stuff so that you can read all about the nitty-gritty details if you are a linguist nerd, for example.
Similar sounds about meaning. What's complex?
I think we're going to skip the video for, I'm not sure that it's quite working there. We are also, because we are in the age of generative AI, we are generating sperm whale vocalizations. Now, I want to emphasize something. We are not generating vocalizations that we intend to play back to whales. And this is a bit of an interesting one, because how do you, naively, how would you test whether you are saying something in a language and someone else understands it? Well, you speak to them, and you see if you get the response that you're expecting. This has a couple of problems in an animal environment. One is, well, if somebody is speaking to me and I don't know who they are, if they look weird, like, they look like an underwater autonomous drone, or if they look like a boat that I'm familiar with in another context and they're saying something suddenly in a language that I don't expect, that's weird. And then when you bring generative AI into the mix, I'm pretty sure that we are all familiar with AI gobbledygook. I think it would be a little bit weird and maybe slightly unethical if we were to then point that gobbledygook at a bunch of whales and say, hi, we're just going to see how you behave and if it upsets you. Even in playing back recordings of whales themselves. So there was an incident with a humpback whale, for example, in Alaska, where the scientists recorded the whale, played back its own voice to itself, and it started attacking their research boat. So we know that actually animals get upset when we do this in the past. There's also a slightly heartbreaking incident of somebody who works with elephants, who played back a recording of a dead matriarch to the herd, and all of the elephants in the herd also started showing signs of distress, essentially. So I think it's pretty clear that we don't want to just create a bunch of AI gobbledygook, we don't know what it says, and just blast it out into the water. That's not the aim of a project that has at its heart really actually protecting these species and bringing understanding to their life for the purpose of protecting them. So what we're doing instead is trying to use generative models that are based on language generation models that work in other contexts. So if we know that we can generate language speech in that theoretically works with languages that we both know that are pretty far apart. Like, for example, there are some tribes that speak in whistles. And that's a pretty different way of speaking than, for example, English or even most other languages. If we can get models that actually can correctly do generation for those, then we can start to reasonably think that we can generate and create large amounts of synthetic whale data that is actually accurate. And I think one of the most exciting things that our team managed to do, and this is really a matter of being in the right place at the right time because we had set up this significant operation in Dominica and because we know that this is where sperm whales go to calve, is we did manage to record the first ever sperm whale birth. I will play a video, but given that the videos have been a bit janky, I will also point you towards the CETI website where you can watch quite a few of these videos if you're interested. But this was a really interesting moment. We had our hydrophones in the water, but we also had drones with video cameras actually circling above the whales. So what we got was this really cool data set of the sperm whale vocalizations along with the video of the birth and what was happening in real time. And a couple of interesting things to highlight from that. One is a sperm whale birth is incredibly communal. This is a societal event. So the mother comes up to the top of the surface water, and all of these different whales start to circle her. And as the birth started actually kind of picking up and happening, and part of like how we knew that this was happening in real time when the folks in the field were there, was the vocalization started picking up. So they started talking to each other a ton, like they were just communicating like we hadn't seen before. And then they were helping actually to hold up the mother and calf at the surface, because of course sperm whales are mammals, so they do also breathe air. And there was this group collaboration. All of this is mentioned in we have a review of the paper. But one thing that we didn't emphasize in the paper, because we kind of thought people would think maybe we were a little bit kooky and weird if we leaned into this too hard, and also we're still figuring out what this meant, is it wasn't just sperm whales. A whole bunch of pilot whales actually also showed up for this birth. Now, pilot whales are traditionally considered to be sperm whale enemies. They harass them a little bit, and they are the marine biologists who are very attached to sperm whales, of whom I've met quite a few recently, are very like anti-pilot whale. It's like a little tug of war, but. These pilot whales weren't engaging in harassing behavior for this birth. We actually don't know what they were doing, and we are trying to figure that out. But to me, it's really fascinating, and I will say on a personal note, right about the time we were working on this paper, I also gave birth, so I had a lot of thoughts and feelings about this kind of like birth experience that this whale had gone through, and that we were watching like a little bit closely. Anyway, it was really interesting to see the social dynamics happening within one species, and maybe, we still don't know, also across species for this whale birth. Let's see if I can show you a little bit about what that looked like. Yeah, so it's a short clip. Let me just play it again for you. So that's the group of whales that you can see there, and we've highlighted them for you. And you can see that they're kind of all circling around one spot. And this actually took about an hour, so that we have a bunch of different clips of this. But they were just like really circling and kind of lifting up this mother as she was being born. It was a really like social group, very communicative moment in this sperm whale's life. So I mentioned that we had some ethical reservations about how we interact and communicate with sperm whales. So as part of that, one of the people that we've partnered with really closely is a group called More Than Human Rights. They're out of NYU. I recommend checking them out if you're interested in these questions. But they helped us put together an ethical framework for working with whales and other species in general. So it's called How Do We Talk to Our Animal Kin? And I think just in summary, this is a really challenging space. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on. And one thing that we're very, very conscious of is kind of not becoming like this person who I have put on here. He is a cautionary tale. This is John C. Lilly, who did a lot of work with dolphins in the 1970s. He is known for giving LSD to dolphins as an experimental technique. I think we are not going to be giving LSD to whales anytime soon to see how they react. All right, so I will end with, if you want to know more and if you want to actually participate a little bit, you can go to the CETI website, and in particular, I would point out this Listen to the Whales campaign, which allows you to interact with a bunch of the CETI recordings, CETI data, and also think about how you would want to communicate with the whale community if that were an option. All right.